Back in 2017, at the peak of Arma 3's hype, Bohemia Interactive had an idea. What if we make a free-to-play first-person shooter using Armas Engine? Help build the franchise in a more competitive market, yet not charging stupid prices with skins, loot boxes, and focus to a more hardcore simulator community. And so with that came Project Argo, a military simulator fan's fast-paced shooter, something rarely seen in many titles of the past, and it was incredibly promising. Yet 4 years later, the game has almost entirely wiped itself off the face of Steam. So what happened? Why did Arma 3's Project Argo fail? Now just called Argo, the game is set on a fictional island called Malden, the same setting as Bohemia's previous game Operation Flashpoint Cold War Crisis. Mercenaries are deployed on Malden by two rival factions, and they fight over the remnants of a crashed space station. The game has three main game modes: combat patrol, and procedurally generated tasks are scattered across the island, a little bit like Wasteland for Arma 3. There's Link, fighting on a smaller scale with both teams trying to hack a central computer, and of course there is another side game mode called Clash, which is basically the same thing but on a bigger scale. And finally you have Raid, a push-pull battle of attackers and defenders taking a more linear approach to taking points on the island. Argo did also have a scene editor much like Arma 3, but to a much lesser extent, really limiting players to the extent that it never really took off the same way that Eden or Zeus did in the main Arma 3 game. So the idea sounds kind of cool, right? A free-to-play Arma. I mean, Arma is incredibly well known as a franchise, and this Project Argo almost offers a fill for this strange gap in the market. Fast-paced free-to-play shooters on the whole are quite similar to each other. Unrealistic, arcadey, flick shot simulators, fun for some but infuriating for others. But as someone who personally loves a more realistic FPS like Arma, Hell Let Loose, Squad, or Insurgency, there isn't really anything on the market to fill this void. Arma, on paper, was the perfect platform, made for vast variations of weapons, gunplay, and game modes, having the ability for bigger battles or scaling down to a more personal style of city fighting and building breaches. So what went wrong? I actually played Project Argo back in its early stages of 2017, yet even then the player base was far from massive, and the game was, well, fine. In principle, it was Arma, yet the combat was somewhat dumbed down and simplified, perhaps, maybe in this case, to its advantage. Extra additions like lowering weapons or weapon sway in a game like Arma 3 were removed for Argo, making it much more accessible to basic FPS shooting. It was great for newer players, right? But the problem was, it was still Arma. Ironically enough, despite Arma 3 being the biggest military simulator on the market at the moment, it's never had the best infantry combat. There's things like lag between shooting and enemies dropping at weird times, making it hard to decipher whether you've actually killed them or not even mentioning Arma's famously bad optimization, which for many players makes first-person infantry shooting near impossible on lower rigs. You see, Arma 3 excels in massive large-scale warfare, simulated bullet physics, incredible realistic details on vehicles and terrain, and massive game modes that take teamwork and strategy to conquer country-sized maps, not in its small-scale tactical skirmishes, or at least in the competitive situation. And this is all Argo focused on, and Arma wasn't made for this, and that really shows in Project Argo. Frame rate issues and input lag make a massive difference in a competitive shooter, and for a game that has so famously struggled with these two factors, it isn't exactly going to fare well. YouTuber OPERATORDREWSKI actually does a fantastic breakdown to show this in his Massive Issues video that was released early in Project Argo's life. It showed that Argo had about 166 millisecond input lag, whereas in a game like Battlefield 4 had something more along the lines of 16 milliseconds. This is a massive difference, and in a competitive shooter, input lag is paramount. Maybe not so much on a massive scale and big battles on an island like fighting against AI opponents in Arma's base game, but in a game that calls itself a competitive shooter, 166 milliseconds is laughable, and it makes it almost impossible for real competitive play. There were many other issues granted within the game, such as a skewed progression system at launch, with many players having way more powerful weapons than others, dominating battles just because they played the game for longer. Once again, that's not really an issue for the base game of Arma, but for a competitive shooter that needs to focus on a player's skill and not what weapons they've unlocked, it doesn't work out too well in the end. So you get the point. Even with a massive popular base audience in Arma 3, the foundations for a competitive game were rocky, and with this, the player base started to drop. As time passed, it was clear to Bohemia that this project just wasn't going to last, resulting resulting in just over a year after release, a tweet coming out, stating that the official servers would be shut down with all support stopping to the game. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't the end of Argo, as even now there are still players, unofficial servers carrying on, with dedicated fans still flocking back every now and then for that free-to-play Arma experience, but I don't think anyone doubts that this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. So, could Argo have been the next massive free-to-play competitive shooter? It's a tricky one, because development started on an uphill slope in the first place, attempting to move a game like Arma to be a competition for something along the lines of a Call of Duty or Counter-Strike wasn't a realistic setting point, and the results show. So where is the game now? Well, as I mentioned, it's a bit in limbo. The developer team have rushed away to do other things, yet a small player base still resides. Whether this is something that we're going to see grow in the future, I really doubt. But the real question is a free-to-play competitive Arma a viable option anyway? I mean, in its current form, Arma 3 just doesn't really offer that. The game and engine is so focused towards its main goal of military simulation that anything other than that doesn't really work. DayZ did work, because it kept everything Arma had, but just added zombies. It didn't try and change the core mechanics of the game, and it's been proven that something that does try and completely overhaul a title's core mechanics won't really find its success, because there isn't a solid enough foundation. But could Arma 4, when we potentially see it, be a more viable option? I think so. If the team behind Argo are doing what they said and going off to work on another project, could this be a new free-to-play game built from the ground up on Arma 4's engine? If tackled and considered early enough in development, the engine could actually be catered towards more of that competitive style of play, and there could be some success here. But alas, at this point, at this time, it just wasn't meant to be. Free-to-play does seem to be the way that things are going, with Warzone and Halo having the free-to-play elements. Now Arma 4 in the future could take advantage of this, a gap in the market for a free-to-play version of a military simulation that has never been done before, and boy, would I love to see it. But I guess only time will tell what the future holds. But let me know down below what you think. Was Argo always doomed to fail because of its basis in Arma 3, or could something else have been done to solve this? Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.